am here sharing is a major accomplishment for me. Sir Edmund Hillary, who climbed Mount Everest, once said, "It is not the mountain we conquer, but ourselves." And the Lord is allowing me to do that just now. The ministry of recovery has changed my life and has freed me from many cover-ups that were hurting me. I'm hoping that sharing a little of my God story too, that you too will find freedom that will enable you to walk in the light. Between the guidance of my godly Christian counselor, Patricia, my wonderful God-loving sponsor, and the 12 steps, I can honestly say today I am no longer in bondage to the memories of what I'm about to share with you, my sexual abuse and trauma. I have very fond memories of my childhood. I felt safe, loved, and had no worries. On many Sundays, we would dress up and go to church, but other than Sundays and grace before dinner, I don't remember God being talked about much at home. However, it was a beautiful, carefree time in my life until I turned 13 and I was raped. This is when fear and anxiety entered my soul. It happened on a summer day in July. My mother, little sister Becky, and I were coming back from a day at the beach in Fort Lauderdale. On our way home, I was annoying my sister in the car, and Mom asked me to stop. I didn't. I remember feeling very rebellious and angry and not wanting to stop bothering her. My mom got upset with me, and that in turn made me want to get out of the car. So while in the car on Dixie Highway, the light turned red, and I opened the door and got out of the car. I walked in a direction where my mom could not see me. She searched for me, but never found me. Meanwhile, while walking, I was thinking she'll find me, but she never did. Mom was worried, but went home thinking I would call her there and she could then pick me up. That call never came. I just continued walking towards home, hoping that Mom would eventually find me. While walking, a car full of teenage kids came whizzing by and stopped to see if I wanted a ride. I said no, and they left kind of laughing. That scared me, and at that point I thought I would never get into a car with strangers. In fact, I was too afraid to even go up to a stranger's house to call home, so I walked and walked about 10 miles. Finally, I was about 2 miles from home when a car pulled up next to me and a young man offered me a ride. To this day, I'm not sure why I got in his car, except for the fact that maybe I was so tired and I did not want to walk anymore. He told me to get in the front seat of his car, and I did, and then I told him that I was on my way home. I started giving him directions on which way to drive. All of a sudden, he made a wrong turn, and I said, "This isn't the way to my house." And that's when he slowed down, looked around outside, and then looked at me and said, "I have a gun under the seat, and I want you to lie down." For a brief moment, I was scared for my life. He said if I did what he told me, he wouldn't hurt me. Right then and there, I went into a numb mode. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't try and get away. I felt powerless. He made me lie down, and now I could smell alcohol on his breath. Everything was so surreal. It was like this was happening to someone else, not me. He drove to an area like a wheat field, stopped the car, and blindfolded me. He walked me to an area that looked to me like he had been there before and told me to be quiet. I did what I was told, very robotic-like. This sick man proceeded to make me do unspeakable things, ending in raping me. He told me to get dressed, and we got back into his car, and he dropped me off a few blocks from my home. As I was getting out of the car, he said words that I still remember today. He said, "Don't tell anyone about this, and don't ever hitchhike again." And then he sped off. I wasn't hitchhiking. I was walking, trying to get home, and he came along with a plan to hurt me. I hated him. All I could think about now was getting home, though. I ran nonstop the whole 4 blocks home. When I got home, I ran to my mother's room and broke down crying. As much as she was relieved I was home, she immediately was sickened over what came pouring out of my mouth. She comforted me as I sat next to her, telling her everything that happened. That day, my life was forever changed. This stranger took my precious innocence away and instead filled me with guilt, fear, pain, and shame, affecting my relationships that were so important to me. The next day, I did see a medical doctor, but I never received any counseling to deal with my now wounded heart. Even though this was the case, the Lord was already working in me and my testimony. My teenage years were filled with anxieties and worries. My mother was dealing with headaches and health issues that ended up with the diagnosis of a brain tumor the size of a grapefruit. She ended up having surgery, and thankfully the tumor was benign. However, soon after her surgery, I started having headaches, thinking I also had a brain tumor. This was when my unresolved sexual trauma started leading to many unhealthy addictions. I was so afraid of losing my mom at this time in my life, I became deeply enmeshed with her. The thought of losing her created deep separation anxiety within me. My anxiety about my headaches picked up, and I found that I could cover the discomfort up by drinking. So I tried alcohol for the first time. I realized after having a little alcohol in my system, I didn't have a headache anymore. Around the age of 18, before leaving for college, I tried marijuana, and I thought that was going to be the answer to all my worries. I thought I could fill the hole in my heart with boyfriends, alcohol, and drugs, but all this was so temporary. These things didn't fill the ache that was so deep inside of me. My lifestyle was making me sick. I thought I had some disease, and I was slowly dying. From time to time, I would go to the doctor to have checkups, and the doctors always told me I was fine. Hearing that helped me feel better for a little, but then the anxiety only returned. During this time, my anxiety now on occasions would turn into severe panic attacks. I remember at times I just couldn't breathe. I would have to go into the bathroom at work to hold my nostrils open just so I wouldn't pass out. When I smoked pot now, I would start to get severely anxious to the point where at one time I almost drove myself to the hospital. So I quit smoking pot and never picked it back up again. I would still drink when I went out with friends, but I never wanted to lose control. I was so scared of these panic attacks that I knew just how much I could drink before I needed to stop. In 1982, I met my future husband. I was one of his supervisors at work, and we soon became good friends. During this time, my anxiety diminished, and I remember thinking he was the cure. But soon, my fears came roaring back. By now, I had been dealing with anxiety for some time, so I went to my doctor again. This time, he gave me a prescription for Valium and said that I was dealing with just too much stress. The only person I felt comfortable in sharing my deepest struggles with was my sister Becky. She helped me so much during this time. I had a lot of anxiety building up in me that at times I thought I was going to have a nervous breakdown. Later I learned that my anxiety was really a pain alarm and that I needed help, and God was allowing this pain to get my attention. I was just covering up my alarm by muting the noise with people, places, and things in my life, not with God, my Father. In 1986, I got married. During this time, my husband had formal work functions to attend, and we would go to these dinners with other couples whom he worked with. I often subconsciously compared myself to the other woman that I would meet. Was I as pretty? Was I as smart? Was I as successful? Was I as good of a mother? I wanted to look my very best and would take hours to make sure I did. I would go to the hairdresser and manicurist and then off to the boutiques to buy the nicest clothes, just to impress people that I didn't even care about. I didn't know that this perfectionist behavior was also part of my addiction that affected my soul. I was superficial. My life was stressful, but I continued in this charade, wearing many different masks depending on who I was with at the time. In December 1986, our beautiful daughter was born. During my pregnancy, I couldn't deny the fact that there was truly a God and that He created and allowed this wonderful life inside of me. However, I didn't know Him as my Savior. My focus turned to my daughter much more than my husband. We were having serious marriage problems. Because of my pain, I shut him out. He didn't know how to identify with me in my anxiety struggles. I felt very alone. He chose to go out drinking and found connections with those he drank with. He was disconnecting from me, and I needed to come face to face with truths about myself that I had been hiding. I needed to confront my pain and needed God's help to bring me out of my denial. In May of 1996, my sister Becky, who had been praying for me for 10 years, was shopping in a Christian bookstore and was led to the led by the Lord to open up a